My sister's $150,000 birthday party was being held at my hotel, but she didn't know I owned it. For years, I'd been the family scapegoat while she was the golden child. They thought I was just another struggling server working minimum wage jobs. But when security approached me at her party, demanding I be removed as a homeless woman, she had no idea she was about to discover who really owned this five-star property. The moment she saw the owner nameplate changed everything between us forever. Growing up as Jennifer Martinez, I was always Sarah's shadow. While she got piano lessons and dance classes, I got a paper route at 12. While she received a brand new Mercedes for her 16th birthday, I got a used bicycle from Goodwill. Our parents, Maria and Carlos Martinez, never said it outright, but their actions spoke volumes. Sarah was their shining star, the daughter who would marry well and make them proud. I was just there. Jennifer, help your sister with her homework, Mom would say, even though I had my own assignments to finish. Jennifer, give Sarah your allowance so she can buy that dress for homecoming. It was always something, always another sacrifice I was expected to make without question. The family photos tell the whole story. Sarah front and center, beaming in her perfect outfits, while I'm pushed to the side, often partially cut out of the frame. Even as a kid, I noticed how the camera always seemed to find her first, how conversations stopped when she entered a room, then resumed around her interests, her achievements, her dreams. Nobody in my family ever asked what I actually did for work. After high school, while Sarah got her full ride to Northwestern University, I took out loans for community college and worked 3 jobs to pay for it. Mornings at a coffee shop, afternoons cleaning offices, nights waiting tables. I'd come home exhausted, fall into bed, and wake up to do it all over again. Sarah would breeze through the kitchen in designer clothes, complaining about her impossible course load of 18 credit hours. Meanwhile, I was carrying 21 credits while working 60 hours a week, but somehow my struggles never made it into family dinner conversations. The breaking point started small, like it always does. Last March, Sarah announced she was planning something absolutely incredible for her 28th birthday. She bounced into our parents' living room during Sunday dinner, practically glowing with excitement. "You guys, I've been planning this for months. I want to throw the party of the century, something Instagram-worthy, something people will talk about for years." She pulled out her phone, showing photos of elaborate celebrations. "I'm thinking the Grandview Hotel downtown. You know, the one with the rooftop terrace and the crystal chandeliers?" My stomach dropped. The Grandview Hotel. Of course she would pick that one. Mom clasped her hands together like Sarah had just announced a Nobel Prize. "Oh, Mija, that sounds wonderful. How exciting!" Dad leaned forward, already reaching for his wallet. "How much do you need, Princess? Whatever it takes to make your day perfect." "Well?" Sarah bit her lip in that practiced way that always made our parents melt. "The venue alone is about $50,000 for the weekend, but with catering, flowers, a live band, photographer." She paused for dramatic effect. "I'm looking at around $150 total. $150,000 for one night." I nearly choked on my water, but nobody noticed because they were all staring at Sarah like she'd just painted the Sistine Chapel. "That's quite an investment," Dad said slowly, but I could already see him calculating in his head. "But you only turned 28 once, right?" I wanted to scream. When I turned 28, I got a text message and a $20 gift card to Target. "But Sarah?" "Sarah gets a party that costs more than most people's houses." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning. Sarah commandeered the dining room table, spreading out fabric samples and flower arrangements like a general planning a military campaign. Every conversation revolved around her vision, her guest list, her menu preferences. "I'm thinking white and gold theme," she mused one evening, holding up swatches. "Very elegant, very sophisticated. Oh, and I want everyone in formal attire. None of that casual stuff that ruins photos." I was sitting in the corner, laptop open, trying to finish an important business proposal, but Sarah's voice cut through my concentration like nails on a chalkboard. "Jennifer," she suddenly said, looking at me for the first time all evening, You are coming, right? The way she asked it, like she was doing me some enormous favor by including me, made my skin crawl. But before I could answer, Mom jumped in. Of course she's coming. It's family. Then, in a lower voice that she probably thought I couldn't hear. Though I'm not sure she has anything appropriate to wear to such a fancy place. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Actually, Mom, I've been thinking about that. The dress code is pretty strict at the Grandview. Black tie only. And honestly, she glanced at me apologetically, but her eyes held no real remorse. I'm worried Jennifer might feel out of place. You know how uncomfortable she gets at fancy events. I looked up from my laptop. I've never said I was uncomfortable at fancy events. Well, no, but remember Maria Gonzalez's wedding? You barely said 2 words the whole night. That's because nobody talked to me except to ask me to take their photos with the bride. An awkward silence settled over the room. Sarah's smile faltered for just a moment, then snapped back into place. I just want everyone to feel comfortable, she said sweetly. Maybe we could have a smaller, more casual family dinner for you? The weekend after? The dismissal was so smooth, so perfectly delivered with a coating of false concern, that even I almost believed she was being considerate. But I knew better. This was vintage Sarah. Making it seem like excluding me was actually a kindness. That's thoughtful of you, Mija, Dad said, completely missing the manipulation. Jennifer, what do you think? What I thought was that I was tired of being treated like the family disappointment. What I thought was that I deserved better than consolation prizes and pity dinners. What I thought was that they had no idea who they were actually talking to. But what I said was, sure, whatever works for everyone else. Sarah beamed. Perfect. Oh, this is going to be so much better. I won't have to worry about, well, you know. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I knew exactly what she meant. She wouldn't have to worry about her successful friends meeting her loser sister. Wouldn't have to make excuses for my discount store clothes or my quiet personality or my apparent lack of ambition. As the weeks passed, the family WhatsApp group that I wasn't included in became increasingly active. I'd catch glimpses of it when Mom left her phone on the counter, screen full of excited messages about party preparations, dress shopping expeditions I wasn't invited to, menu tastings I didn't know about, a whole parallel universe of family bonding that somehow never had room for me. Oh, we thought you'd be too busy with your server job, Mom said when I asked about a shopping trip I'd overheard them discussing. Server job. That's what they thought I did for a living. It wasn't entirely wrong. I had started as a server years ago, but they'd never bothered to ask if anything had changed. Never wondered how I could afford my own apartment, my car payments, the business clothes I wore to meetings they assumed were job interviews. The willful blindness was almost impressive. Here I was, working 80-hour weeks, building something incredible from nothing, and they saw only what they expected to see. The struggling little sister who couldn't quite get her life together. 2 weeks before the party, Sarah made an announcement that shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow still felt like a slap. I finalized the guest list today, she said, waving her phone triumphantly. 350 people. Everyone who's anyone will be there. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Mom said. Your father and I are so proud. Thanks. Oh, and I talked to the hotel manager today. They're being super strict about the guest list since it's such an exclusive event. No plus ones unless they're pre-approved, no last-minute additions. Sarah's eyes found mine across the room. So it's really good that we're doing the separate dinner for Jennifer. Much more relaxed that way. The message was clear. Even if I wanted to attend, even if I somehow found appropriate clothing and worked up the courage to ask, there was no room for me at Sarah's perfect party. I was officially uninvited from my own sister's birthday celebration. That night, I sat in my apartment, the apartment they thought I could barely afford, and stared at the contract on my coffee table. The contract that made me the sole owner of the Grandview Hotel. The property I'd bought 18 months ago after years of careful investment and business development that my family had never bothered to ask about. I thought about calling them. Thought about walking into that dining room and laying out bank statements, property deeds, business licenses. thought about watching their faces as they realized their failure daughter was actually more successful than they'd ever dreamed. But something held me back. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the desire to see just how far they'd take this charade. Or maybe, deep down, I needed to know once and for all who they really were when they thought no one important was watching. The week of Sarah's party arrived with all the fanfare of a royal wedding. The house buzzed with activity as relatives flew in from across the country, everyone eager to celebrate the golden child's milestone birthday. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly appeared, all talking about Sarah's incredible party and how lucky they were to be invited. "Did you see the venue she picked?" Aunt Rosa gushed to Mom while I passed through the kitchen. "The Grandview Hotel. That place is impossible to book. She must have connections." Mom puffed up with pride. "Sarah has always been special. She knows how to make things happen." I poured myself coffee and listened to them discuss the elaborate arrangements. The 5-course dinner, the imported flowers, the live jazz quartet, every detail more extravagant than the last. Every dollar spent a testament to Sarah's worth in their eyes. "What about Jennifer?" Aunt Rosa asked, noticing me for the first time. "Is she excited about the party?" The pause that followed was deafening. Mom's smile flickered just slightly. "Well, you know Jennifer. She's more comfortable with smaller gatherings. Sarah was sweet enough to arrange a separate celebration that's more her style." Aunt Rosa nodded knowingly. "Oh, that's probably better. Some people just aren't comfortable with fancy events." I wanted to laugh. If they only knew that I'd hosted dozens of high-profile events at my properties, that I'd rubbed elbows with mayors and celebrities and business leaders, that the fancy event they thought would intimidate me was happening at a hotel where I had personally approved every detail of the renovation. But I just smiled and nodded, playing the role they'd assigned me, the quiet sister who knew her place. The morning of the party, the house was chaos. Hairstylists and makeup artists had been booked for Sarah and Mom. Dress bags hung from every doorway. Dad paced nervously in his rented tuxedo, checking his watch every 5 minutes. "The car service will be here at 5, Sarah announced, appearing in the doorway like a vision in white silk and gold beading. She looked genuinely beautiful, radiant with excitement and anticipation. For a moment, I felt a pang of the old sisterly affection, the love that had somehow survived years of being pushed aside. "You look incredible," I said, and I meant it. Sarah's smile softened. "Thanks, Jen. I know this whole situation is weird, but I really do think you'll be happier at the family dinner next week. No pressure, no crowds, just us." She almost sounded sincere, almost. But then she glanced at my jeans and sweater, and I caught the flash of relief in her eyes. Relief that I wouldn't be there to embarrass her in front of her important friends. "Have a wonderful time," I said. "I hope it's everything you dreamed of." As the family piled into their luxury car service, dressed to the nines and chattering excitedly about the evening ahead, I stood in the doorway and watched them drive away. They were heading to my hotel to celebrate in the ballroom I had personally designed, to eat food prepared by the chef I had hired, to dance under chandeliers I had selected, and they had no idea that the loser sister they'd left behind owned every inch of the place where they were about to have the time of their lives. I waited exactly 1 hour after they left. Then I changed into my most casual clothes, faded jeans, an old sweater, scuffed sneakers. I pulled my hair back in a messy ponytail and deliberately left my makeup bare. If they wanted to see me as the poor relation, the struggling sister who couldn't afford nice things, then that's exactly what they were going to get. The Grandview Hotel looked spectacular as I approached. The exterior was draped in white lights and gold ribbons, transforming the already elegant building into something truly magical. Valets in crisp uniforms guided expensive cars to the parking area. Men in tuxedos and women in designer gowns swept through the grand entrance like something out of a movie. I walked past the main entrance and used the employee entrance on the side, a door I'd used countless times during the renovation process, but one that would be invisible to the party guests. Inside, the hotel hummed with activity. Servers hurried through corridors with champagne trays, musicians tuned their instruments, and my event coordinator checked her tablet for the 100th time. "Ms. Martinez!" She spotted me immediately, rushing over with a concerned expression. "Is everything all right? Do you need anything?" I smiled. Lisa had been working with me for 2 years, managing events at all 3 of my hotel properties. She was one of the few people who knew the whole story about tonight's party. "Everything's perfect, Lisa. I just wanted to check on things personally." Her eyes twinkled with mischief. "Are you sure you want to go through with this? It's going to be intense." I thought about Sarah's relieved expression that morning, about Mom's excuses to Aunt Rosa, about Dad reaching for his wallet without question for Sarah while I'd worked 3 jobs to pay for community college. "I'm sure." Lisa nodded. "Well, your sister certainly spared no expense. The final bill came to exactly $153,412. $153,000. More than most people made in 3 years, spent on a single night of celebration for someone who had never worked a day for it in her life." "Perfect," I said. "Let's give her a party she'll never forget." I made my way toward the main ballroom, staying in the service corridors until I was ready. Through the small windows in the swinging doors, I could see the party in full swing. The ballroom looked like something out of a fairy tale, all white flowers and golden candles and glittering decorations. The jazz quartet played softly in one corner while guests mingled with champagne glasses, everyone dressed to perfection. And there, in the center of it all, was Sarah. She moved through the crowd like a queen holding court, accepting congratulations and compliments with gracious smiles. Our parents flanked her, beaming with pride as they introduced their successful daughter to anyone who would listen. I watched for a few more minutes, taking in the scene. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the sparkle of jewelry under the chandeliers. It really was beautiful. Sarah had excellent taste. I had to give her that. She'd chosen well. She'd chosen my hotel. Taking a deep breath, I pushed through the service doors and stepped into the ballroom. The first person to notice me was a server I'd hired specifically for tonight, Marcus, a young man I'd trained personally when he started working at my downtown location 6 months ago. His eyes widened when he saw me, confusion flickering across his face. "Ms. Martinez, what are you—" "It's fine, Marcus," I said quietly. "Just continue with your work." But the damage was done. His voice had carried just enough to catch the attention of the security guard stationed near the entrance. Brian Williams, head of security for all my properties, turned and spotted me immediately. This was where things got interesting. Brian didn't know about my family situation. All he knew was that someone in casual clothes had wandered into an exclusive black tie event, someone who clearly didn't belong based on the dress code alone. He was just doing his job when he approached me, professional but firm. "Excuse me, miss," he said politely. "I'm going to need to see your invitation." His voice was quiet, but in the acoustics of the ballroom, it carried. A few nearby guests turned to look, curiosity replacing their party conversations. I saw Sarah's head turn in our direction, her smile faltering as she registered the disturbance. "I don't have an invitation," I said simply. Brian's expression grew more concerned. "I'm sorry, but this is a private event. If you're not on the guest list, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." More heads were turning now. The elegant party atmosphere began to shift as people sensed drama brewing. Sarah was pushing through the crowd, her face a mask of horror and embarrassment. "What's going on here?" she demanded, reaching us in a swirl of white silk. When she saw me, her eyes went wide with shock and mortification. "Jennifer, what are you doing here?" Her voice carried across the ballroom like a gunshot. Conversations stopped. The jazz quartet played on, but their music seemed suddenly too loud in the awful silence. "I just wanted to see the party," I said mildly. "It looks lovely." Sarah's face flushed red beneath her perfectly applied makeup. I could practically see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to handle this disaster without causing more of a scene. "You can't be here," she hissed, stepping closer. "This is invitation only. The dress code— Is there a problem here?" Dad appeared at Sarah's shoulder, taking in the scene with growing alarm. When he saw me, His expression cycled through surprise, embarrassment, and anger in rapid succession. "Jennifer, what are you thinking?" he said in a harsh whisper. "You can't just show up like this. Look at yourself. Look around you." I did look around, at the hundreds of elegantly dressed guests who were now openly staring at our family drama, at the servers who had stopped their work to watch, at Mom, who was pushing through the crowd with a look of absolute panic on her face. "Oh my God," Mom breathed when she reached us. "Jennifer, please, don't do this. Not tonight." The security guard looked between us, clearly confused by the family dynamics, but still focused on his job. "So this is a family member?" he asked Sarah. Sarah hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, I saw everything I needed to know about where I stood in her world. Sarah started, then stopped. She looked at me standing there in my casual clothes, surrounded by her glamorous friends and their judging eyes. She looked at the security guard, waiting for an answer. She looked at our parents, their faces pleading with her to handle this quietly, to make it go away. "She's my sister," Sarah finally said, the words coming out like an apology. "But she's not supposed to be here." The security guard nodded, understanding now. This wasn't an intruder. This was a family problem. But it was still his job to maintain the exclusive nature of the event. "I'm sorry," he said to me, genuine regret in his voice. "But if you're not on the guest list and you don't meet the dress code requirements, I really do need to ask you to leave. It's nothing personal, just the rules." I looked at Sarah, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears of embarrassment. I looked at my parents, who couldn't quite meet my gaze. I looked at the crowd of strangers who were getting quite the show with their overpriced dinner, and then I smiled. "Of course," I said pleasantly. "I understand completely. Rules are rules." Relief flooded Sarah's face. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll call you tomorrow, okay? We can talk about this." I nodded and started to turn away, letting the security guard escort me toward the exit. But as we walked past the registration desk near the entrance, something caught my eye, something that made my smile grow wider. Sitting on the polished marble surface, positioned so that every guest would see it as they entered, was a small bronze nameplate, the kind of plaque that high-end hotels displayed to showcase their prestige and ownership, the kind of detail that most people would walk right past without reading. But I read it, and more importantly, I stopped walking. The security guard noticed my hesitation. "Is everything all right, miss?" I pointed at the nameplate. "Could you read that for me?" He looked confused but obliged. "It says, The Grand View Hotel, property of Martinez Holdings, LLC. He paused. "Why?" Behind us, I could hear Sarah's voice rising as she tried to redirect the party's attention back to celebration instead of drama. I could hear our parents making excuses to curious relatives, explaining away the misunderstanding with the security situation. But they weren't listening to the conversation happening near the registration desk. "And who?" I asked the security guard in a voice that was suddenly much stronger, much clearer than it had been moments before. "Do you think owns Martinez Holdings?" The security guard's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. Behind his confusion, I could see the pieces clicking into place. The casual clothes that had seemed so out of place. The way Marcus the server had recognized me. The fact that I had walked straight through the service entrance like I owned the place. Because I did own the place. "Oh my God," the security guard breathed. "I'm Jennifer Martinez," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the marble foyer. "And this is my hotel." The words cut through the ballroom chatter like a blade. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the jazz quartet seemed to miss a note. In the sudden, profound silence, I could hear Sarah's sharp intake of breath from across the room. I turned slowly to face the crowd, all those elegant people in their designer clothes, all those friends and family members who had watched me get escorted toward the door like some kind of party crasher. "I'm sorry for the confusion," I said, addressing the room at large. "But I believe there's been a misunderstanding about who exactly belongs here tonight." The silence that followed my announcement was deafening. 350 people stood frozen in their designer clothes, champagne glasses suspended halfway to their lips, their eyes ping-ponging between me and the bronze nameplate that had just shattered their understanding of reality. "I'm sorry for the confusion," I repeated, my voice steady and clear in the crystalline quiet. "But I believe there's been a misunderstanding about who exactly belongs here tonight." Sarah's face had gone completely white beneath her professionally applied makeup. She stood there in her $8,000 designer gown, mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, no sound emerging. For the first time in our entire lives, Sarah Martinez was speechless. Mom was the first to break. That's not possible," she stammered, her voice cracking. "Jennifer, what are you talking about? You work at a restaurant. You serve tables." I walked slowly back toward my family, the crowd parting before me like the Red Sea. With each step, I felt something shift inside my chest, a weight I'd been carrying for 30 years finally beginning to lift. "I did serve tables, Mom, for about 6 months when I was 19. That was 12 years ago." I stopped directly in front of them, close enough to see the confusion and dawning horror in their eyes. "But you never asked what happened after that. You never asked about the business degree I earned while working those 3 jobs. You never asked about the real estate investments I made with every penny I saved. You never asked about Martinez Holdings, or the other 2 hotels I own downtown, or why I've been working 80-hour weeks for the past 5 years. Dad's face was cycling through emotions so rapidly it was almost comical. Disbelief, shock, embarrassment, and something that might have been pride if it wasn't overshadowed by mortification. But you dress so—" He gestured helplessly at my casual clothes. "Like someone who was told she didn't belong at her own sister's party?" I finished gently. "Yes, Dad, that was intentional." The crowd began to murmur, a low buzz of whispered conversations as 350 people tried to process the drama unfolding before them. I could hear fragments. "Did she say she owns this place? That's her sister? Oh my God, they tried to kick out the owner?" Sarah finally found her voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper. "Jennifer, I don't understand. How is this possible?" For a moment, just a moment, I saw a flicker of the little sister I used to protect from bullies at school, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, the one I had loved unconditionally before I learned that love wasn't always a two-way street. "It's possible," I said quietly, "because while you were studying communications and getting your MRIS degree, I was building something. While you were planning sorority formals, I was working 16-hour days and learning about business from the ground up. While you were dating trust fund babies, I was buying my first property with money I saved by eating ramen noodles for 2 straight years." The words weren't cruel, but they landed like physical blows. Sarah's perfectly composed facade cracked, tears beginning to spill down her cheeks. "But why didn't you tell us?" Mom interjected, her voice desperate. "Oh, why would you keep this secret?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Why indeed? I looked around the ballroom, my ballroom, at the faces of relatives and family friends who had watched me be dismissed, ignored, and marginalized for decades. People who had never once asked about my life, my dreams, my struggles, or my successes. "When exactly would I have told you, Mom?" I asked. During the family dinners where the only topic of conversation was Sarah's latest achievement? During the holidays where I was assigned to kitchen duty while Sarah held court in the living room? During the phone calls you never made, or the texts you never sent? I gestured toward the nameplate. "I've owned this hotel for 18 months. 18 months, Mom. That's 18 family gatherings where not one of you asked how I could afford my apartment, my car, my clothes. 18 months where you assumed I was struggling because that's what fit your narrative." Aunt Rosa stepped forward from the crowd, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Jennifer, we had no idea, but you always seemed so—" "So what, Aunt Rosa? So quiet? So unsuccessful? So much less than Sarah?" The accusation hit home. I could see it in her expression, in the way her eyes dropped to the floor. "We thought you were happy," Dad said weakly. You never complained. You never asked for help. I almost laughed. I stopped asking for help when I was 12 years old, and you told me I needed to be more independent like other kids. I stopped sharing my achievements when I made honor roll 3 semesters in a row, and you forgot to acknowledge it because Sarah made varsity cheerleader. I stopped trying to be part of this family when I realized you only saw me as the supporting cast in Sarah's life story. The ballroom had gone completely silent again. Even the servers had stopped moving, standing frozen with their trays as they witnessed the most expensive family therapy session in hotel history. Sarah's tears were flowing freely now, her carefully applied mascara creating dark trails down her cheeks. "Jen, I'm so sorry. I never realized. I never meant." "Didn't you?" I asked, and my voice was gentle but implacable. "Because from where I'm standing, this looks pretty deliberate. You booked my hotel, the most expensive venue in the city, for your party. You invited everyone in our extended family except me. You made sure I knew I didn't meet your standards, didn't fit your image, didn't deserve a place at your celebration." I paused, looking around the room at all those faces staring back at me. "And you know what? You were right. I don't belong at Sarah's party, because Sarah's party is about celebrating someone who's never worked for anything, never struggled for anything, never built anything with her own hands." My voice grew stronger, clearer. "I belong at Jennifer Martinez's hotel, in Jennifer Martinez's ballroom, surrounded by the success that Jennifer Martinez created through 12 years of 18-hour days and 4 hours of sleep and choosing between groceries and textbooks." The transformation was complete. I could feel it happening in real time, like a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis. The quiet, accommodating sister who had spent 3 decades making herself smaller was gone. In her place stood someone I barely recognized, someone powerful, confident, unashamed. "Now," I said, addressing the crowd at large, "you're all welcome to continue celebrating. The bar is open, the food is excellent, and the staff will take care of anything you need. This is still Sarah's birthday party, and I want her to enjoy it." I turned back to my family. "But I won't be staying. I have a conference call with investors in Hong Kong in an hour, and then I need to review the quarterly reports for my Portland property. You know, work stuff." Sarah took a shaky step forward. "Jennifer, please, can we talk? Can we fix this?" I looked at her, really looked at her, for a long moment. The golden child who had never questioned why she deserved more love, more attention, more investment than her sister. The princess who had built her kingdom on the assumption that someone else would always be less worthy of consideration. "I don't know, Sarah," I said honestly. "Can we? Because fixing this would require you to acknowledge that for 30 years, you've been complicit in treating me like I was worth less than you. It would require Mom and Dad to admit that their love came with conditions I could never meet. It would require all of you to face the fact that while you were writing me off as the family failure, I was becoming more successful than any of you ever imagined." I paused, letting that sink in. "And honestly, I'm not sure any of you are ready for that conversation." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Jennifer," he said, his voice hoarse, "you're our daughter, your family. Nothing changes that." "Everything changes that, Dad," I replied. "Love isn't just a word you say. It's not just biology or shared DNA. It's showing up. It's paying attention. It's celebrating someone's successes and supporting them through failures. It's treating them like they matter." I looked around at the faces of my relatives, my parents' friends, Sarah's social circle. Some looked ashamed. Others seemed fascinated by the drama. A few appeared to be mentally recalculating their opinion of the quiet Martinez sister they'd overlooked for decades. "I've spent my entire adult life trying to earn something from you that you gave Sarah for free," I continued. "Your attention, your pride, your assumption that I was worth investing in. And tonight, watching you try to have me removed from my own property because I didn't look successful enough to belong at your daughter's party, I finally understand something." I took a deep breath. "I can't earn what you're not willing to give." and I can't keep trying to prove myself to people who have decided my worth based on outdated assumptions and their own inability to see past their favorite child. Sarah stepped forward again, desperation clear in her voice. But we can change, Jen. I can change. Please, just give us a chance. For a moment, I wavered. The old Jennifer, the one who had spent 30 years hoping for crumbs of affection, wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to accept any promise of change, any hint that maybe things could be different. But the new Jennifer, the one who owned 3 hotels and employed 200 people and had built an empire through sheer determination, knew better. Change isn't something you promise, Sarah. It's something you do, and it takes time and consistency and a fundamental shift in how you see the world and other people. I pulled my business card from my pocket, not that I needed to, but the gesture felt appropriate, and handed it to her. When you're ready to have a real conversation about how we got here and what it would take to build something different, call me. But I'm done pretending that surface-level apologies and promises can fix 30 years of being treated as less than. I turned to address the room one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy the rest of your evening. The staff has been instructed to provide exceptional service, and I hope Sarah's party is everything she dreamed it would be. As I walked toward the exit, the crowd parted again, but this time it felt different. Less like Moses parting the Red Sea and more like a queen making her exit. I could hear the whispers starting up behind me. Speculation, amazement, recalculation of social hierarchies. Wait! Sarah's voice caught me just as I reached the ballroom doors. I turned back to see her rushing toward me, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. Jen, please, will you at least tell me how this happened? How you became this? I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw not the golden child or the family princess, but a 28-year-old woman who had just realized that her understanding of the world was completely wrong. It happened because I had to, I said simply. Because when you grow up being told you're not good enough, not smart enough, not worthy enough, you have 2 choices. You can accept that narrative and spend your life trying to earn what other people got for free, or you can decide to write your own story. Sarah's eyes were wide, searching my face like she was seeing me for the first time. And you chose to write your own story. I did. It took me a long time to realize that I could. It took even longer to stop caring whether you and Mom and Dad would ever read it. I paused at the threshold of my ballroom, looking back at the party in full swing. My party, technically, even though it was celebrating someone else. The funny thing is, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the space, I really did want to be here tonight, not to cause a scene or prove a point, but because despite everything, I love my sister and I wanted to celebrate with her. I would have worn a formal dress, followed the protocol, played by the rules. All you had to do was invite me. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, one hand pressed to her chest. But you didn't, I continued, because in your mind, I was an embarrassment, someone who might diminish your perfect evening with my presence, someone who didn't deserve a seat at the table. I smiled then, but it wasn't cruel. If anything, it was sad. What you didn't realize is that I already had the best seat in the house. I just finally decided to claim it. With that, I walked out of my own ballroom, leaving behind 30 years of trying to fit into a family that had never made space for me. Behind me, I could hear the party slowly resuming, conversations starting up again, the jazz quartet finding their rhythm, the clink of champagne glasses as people tried to process what they'd just witnessed. But I wasn't thinking about the party anymore. I was thinking about the future I was walking toward. A future where my worth wasn't determined by other people's opinions, where my success didn't need their validation, where my happiness wasn't conditional on their approval. 3 months later, I received a letter. Not a text or an email, but an actual handwritten letter on expensive stationery. Sarah's familiar handwriting filled 3 pages, and as I read it, I could hear her voice in every carefully chosen word. The letter was different from her immediate apologies at the party. Those had been panic responses, damage control, attempts to fix things quickly and restore the status quo. This was deeper, a real examination of our family dynamics and her role in perpetuating them. She wrote about therapy sessions, about difficult conversations with our parents, about the slow, painful process of recognizing how her position as the favorite child had blinded her to my experiences. She wrote about the family dinner they'd held the week after her party, the one that had originally been planned as my consolation prize, and how empty it felt with my absence. "I keep thinking about what you said," she wrote, "about how you would have worn a formal dress and followed the protocol if I had just invited you. It made me realize that I never gave you the chance to be part of my life. I just assumed you wouldn't fit. And the worst part is, I was relieved when you didn't fight for inclusion because it meant I didn't have to examine why I was excluding you in the first place." The letter wasn't asking for forgiveness exactly. It was asking for the possibility of rebuilding something different, something based on mutual respect rather than family obligation, something where both sisters were valued for who they were rather than how they compared to each other. I read the letter 3 times before setting it aside. Then I went to my office, the corner office on the 20th floor of my newest property, and looked out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Sarah was probably wondering if I would respond, if there was still a chance to repair what had been broken between us. The old Jennifer would have called immediately, would have been so grateful for any acknowledgement of her worth that she would have accepted Sarah's overture without question. But the new Jennifer had learned something important in those months since the party. Forgiveness was a process, not a moment. Trust was earned through actions, not words. And love, real love, had to be demonstrated over time. 6 months after the party, I did call Sarah, not because I was ready to pretend the past didn't matter, but because I was finally strong enough to engage with her from a position of equality rather than desperation. Our first conversation was awkward, stilted, full of careful politeness and unfinished sentences. But it was a start. We began meeting for coffee once a month, neutral ground, time limits, no expectations beyond showing up. Slowly, carefully, we started building something new, not a restoration of what we'd had before, because what we'd had before was broken from the beginning, but something different, something based on who we were now rather than the roles we'd been assigned as children. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, misunderstandings, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. Sarah had to learn to see me as an equal rather than a supporting character in her story. I had to learn to trust that her changed behavior was genuine rather than temporary. Our parents were a different challenge entirely. Dad struggled with the revelation that his quiet daughter had been building an empire under his nose. He seemed to take it as a personal failure that he hadn't noticed, hadn't asked, hadn't known. Mom's response was more complex, a mixture of pride in my success and defensiveness about her parenting choices. "I don't understand why you felt you couldn't tell us," she said during one particularly difficult family dinner. "We would have been proud of you." "Would you?" I asked gently. "Because I tried to share smaller achievements for years, and they were always overshadowed by something Sarah was doing. I learned that my accomplishments weren't interesting to you unless they reflected well on the family as a whole." The conversation that followed was painful, but necessary. We had to acknowledge the truth about how our family had functioned before we could figure out how it might function going forward. A year after the party, Sarah invited me to her engagement celebration. Not a lavish affair this time, a small gathering of close friends and family in the private dining room of one of my restaurants. When the invitation arrived, it included a handwritten note. "I know I have no right to ask, but it would mean everything to me if you were there. You belong at every celebration in my life, and I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that." I went. I wore a beautiful dress, brought an expensive gift, and gave a heartfelt toast about the importance of choosing family every day, rather than just being born into it. Sarah cried during my speech, and afterward, she hugged me tighter than she ever had. "Thank you," she whispered in my ear, "for not giving up on us completely, for giving me the chance to be a better sister." I hugged her back, and for the first time in our lives, it felt like we were meeting as equals. The transformation wasn't just about my relationship with Sarah or even with my parents. It was about my relationship with myself. For 30 years, I had defined my worth through other people's eyes, had built my identity around being the overlooked sister, the underestimated daughter, the one who had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Standing in that ballroom, claiming my space and my success, had been about more than correcting their misperception. It had been about finally seeing myself clearly, not as the supporting character in someone else's story, but as the protagonist of my own. Today, Martinez Holdings owns 7 properties across 3 states. I employ over 600 people, many of whom are young women and men who remind me of my younger self. Hardworking, ambitious, overlooked by people who should have been cheering them on. I make it a point to see them, to ask about their goals, to create opportunities for advancement. Sarah and I have dinner together every few weeks now. She asks about my business, remembers the names of my employees, celebrates my victories without making them about her. She's learning to be genuinely proud of her sister rather than threatened by her success. Our parents are still adjusting. Dad has started introducing me as my daughter, the successful businesswoman to his friends, which feels both validating and strange after years of being Jennifer, you know, the quiet one. Mom has begun asking for my advice about their retirement investments, finally recognizing that I might know something about financial planning. It's not perfect. Families never are. But it's honest in a way our relationships never were before. We're building something new on the foundation of truth rather than pretense, recognition rather than assumption, mutual respect rather than conditional love. Sometimes people ask me if I regret causing such a scene at Sarah's party. They wonder if there might have been a quieter way to address the family dynamics, a more private conversation that could have achieved the same results without the public drama. But I don't regret it. That moment of standing in my own ballroom, claiming my own success, refusing to be diminished by people who should have been lifting me up, that moment changed everything. Not just for my family, but for me. It taught me that sometimes you have to be willing to risk everything you have to become everything you're meant to be. That true love doesn't require you to make yourself smaller so others can feel bigger. That belonging isn't something you earn through self-sacrifice. It's something you create by knowing your own worth. The little girl who used to hide in the shadows, hoping someone would notice she was there, is gone. In her place is a woman who builds her own spotlight, creates her own opportunities, and refuses to accept less than she deserves. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, if it challenges their assumptions about who I'm supposed to be and how I'm supposed to behave, then maybe it's time for them to examine their own expectations rather than asking me to diminish my light. Because I'm done being the supporting character in anyone else's story. I'm the owner of this hotel, the CEO of this company, the author of this life, and my story is just getting started.